Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the C.G.Jung helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event, I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic.
Recording in progress, that's very good. And I want to welcome you to today's topics, which is dreams and dream interpretation. And this is something that Jung is pretty famous for, because Jung was interested in a lot of different weird things, and one of it was dreams. And as a short introduction, Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, was born in 1875, died in 1961, so had a very long life, lived through First and Second World War in Switzerland, and became a forerunner of psychology, what was back then a very new science, and broke new ground by exploring a new continent. As Jung said, he and his colleagues, they were the first people on this continent that he would say in the future would be populated with the people who would come after him. And dreams need no introduction really, because everybody has dreams, everybody knows dreams. And dreams are special in that sense that until recently, they've been not really in the focus of scientific investigation. So it was very different in the past, where dreams were taken seriously. For example, in ancient Egypt or ancient Rome, you had certain cults, even politics, where the role of dreams was way more pronounced. So for example, in ancient Egypt, you had a cult of Isis or Isis, where you could only join when you had a very specific dream. So you would basically want to get into the cult, and they won't let you until you would tell them the right dream. So you would dream, and wait sometimes for years until the right dream would come, and then you would go to people and tell it to them, and then they would say, okay, yeah, now you can be part of the cult because you had the right dream. On ancient Rome, there was the daughter of a senator who dreamt that the goddess would approach her, and she would complain, the goddess, that her temple is in ruins and the Romans should do something about it. And she would tell that to her father, and the Roman Senate would decide to rebuild this temple. Of course, this role of dreams was over time diminished more and more. And this was until roughly 100 years ago, when somebody called Sigmund Freud wrote a very important book called The Interpretation of Dreams. And this was published in 1899, and he worked on it the rest of his life. And he revised it several times. And this book is pretty interesting, as he approached dreams as a diagnostic tool to look into the psyche of the patients and find out what's going on in the psyche and trying to help the patients. And it's a really interesting book in the sense that it's incredibly well structured, and it takes the topic of dreams and dream interpretation very seriously. It's interesting to have something that is so vague and feeble, like dreams, taken so serious. There's no hidden thoughts in it. So I can only highly recommend it to read this book just for the experience. I found it very thrilling. Even though if you should disagree with psychoanalysis and the views of Freud, it's just an interesting book to read for this experience. A colleague and a friend of Freud was Jung. And through this book, Jung got introduced into dreams and dream interpretation. And in the beginning of Jung's life, he was a proponent of psychoanalysis. So they were best buddies for roughly 6-7 years. But there was always a little bit of disconnect between them. Freud was older, over 20 years older than Jung, and Jung was young, up and coming, and found psychoanalysis amazing because psychoanalysis was the first verifiable approach to the unconscious, the explanation how to approach the unconscious and what it is and how it works. Jung verified this by his own research and his own methods, but they had different worldviews. So Jung was very oriented towards occult, spiritual, mythology, religion, and so on. And Freud was extremely restrictive about, okay, yeah, there's sex as a main driver of psychology, and that, and we should not talk about anything else. Otherwise, we have people not taking us seriously as a science, the science of psychoanalysis. So when they split, for a whole lot of reasons, Jung pursued his own direction of psychoanalysis, which he called analytical psychology. So not so far away. And when you want to learn about what Jung talked about dreams, you have this collective works, but the collected works are rather limited in the information department about dreams. And the most amazing thing you can do is just get a book by Jung, which has dream in the title. And those are mostly seminars. You got children dreams, you got dream symbols of the individuation process, you got dream analysis, which is very thick, I think 700, 800 pages. And they're all great. They're really, really, really good because Jung is, let's say, a good speaker. And his seminars are very helpful to understand dreams. What I'm drawing from are all those different sources from his collected works, from the seminars, from letters, from talks he gave, to synthesize this overview into dreams and dream interpretation. And to give you a little bit of an idea that dreams are not really random, something that Jung really proposed, but that there's something deeper going on and more important. I looked through a list of people who had interesting or important dreams, which led to certain scientific discoveries. For example, there is one person, a chemist called August Kekulé, who came up with the benzene ring, which means the linking of molecules in a ring. He had as a dream, he dreamt of the snake that devours itself, the Ouroboros. Or you have James Watson, who came up with the DNA double helix. And this idea how the DNA is structured came through him through a dream, which was two snakes who were intertwined. And also the person who came up with the sewing machine, Elias Howe, he dreamt of, so there were guards with spears and they had a hole in the spear top. And this gave him the inspiration for the sewing machine, or the guy who came up with manufacturing billiard balls for pool. He also dreamt up the machine and up till the smallest screw. There is some processes happening which are creative in the psyche of persons, which is removed from everything else, which is a little impersonal and rather creative in its own ways. And one story I found really interesting. It was about an American truck driver who drove around the country in his truck, did not earn a lot of money. And one day he had a dream of a killer robot trying to kill him. And this had a very strong impression on him. So he sat down and he wrote it into a story. He wrote a screenplay about it and he shopped around Hollywood to get it made. But nobody wanted to make it because basically in Hollywood, nobody wants to make anything unless it's clear it's a hit. When some truck driver comes and said, I want to make a killer robot movie, nobody's interested. So he did it himself and it became incredibly successful. It was the Terminator and it was James Cameron, who had then a career stellar and now is one of the most successful directors in the world. Just with the new Avatar movie, as shown again, he can really make some movies that reach the masses and has incredible success. So to understand the Jungian view of dreams, it's important to understand how Jung saw the psyche and how it's structured, because he saw a certain structure in the psyche, how certain parts are relating. And to establish some baseline terms, I want to give you this introduction, which starts with the basic separation between consciousness and unconscious. So when you would take you as a person, he would describe that as ego, which is just the perceiving part. So you experiencing, seeing, noticing, being aware of things, this is ego, and everything around it is consciousness, similar to a campfire where you're in the middle of the flame, and around it you have the light that shines into the darkness and illuminates the ground around it. So everything that is related to the ego is consciousness. That's everything you know, you can do, everything you have done. And it's a little bit like when you want to go get to know someone, just as I did my introduction and I'm telling my name, what I did, why I did it, and so on. As long as I know it, I can connect it to me. That's consciousness. And consciousness, of course, shapes also perception, because of what you know and what you can do makes you act differently in the world. I have a good friend of mine who's a geologist who studied it. So I can go with him through the forest and he can tell me, oh, there was an iceberg coming through here 10,000 years ago. I can tell him, how do you see that? And he can say, yeah, you can see here on the rocks and so on. So this is his consciousness being able to see certain parts of reality that I'm not aware of. And consciousness is this growing part. So when you're a small child, of course, you're basically can't do nothing. You don't know anything. And by learning and doing, you expand the scope of consciousness. The light shines brighter and the area that is lit gets bigger and bigger. So everything, of course, that's not lit is the unconscious. This is really how you talk about everything which is not related to you, which is not known, which is not yet understood or integrated. In this unconscious part, Jung sees really layers, like sediments in the earth, where you can go deeper and you reach older and older structures. So the immediate unconscious that lies just beyond your awareness is the personal unconscious, which is all the things you maybe don't want to talk about or don't want to think about, you don't want to be aware about in yourself, in your life. So there are a lot of disagreeable parts go to traumatic things, for example, sad things, things that also make you angry, that gives you maybe a wrong impression about yourself, or maybe a correct impression, and that could be it. And after that, there comes the collective part. Collective part can be in your family or in your country, in your culture, and even to the point where you have something that connects all the human beings in the world. And this is this collective part. This is basically human nature. This is not really you, but you get it automatically as born. Same as animals are born with certain instincts to build a nest, find a partner, and so on. Animals don't really have to be taught. The same, human beings have certain instincts that are just existing with birth. And this is a collective unconscious part. And of course, if you would go deep enough, at a certain point, you hit biology and then chemistry. And in the end, it's physics. Everything is protons, electrons, and neutrons. And even stuff below that. Where Jung was interested in was really this interaction between consciousness and unconscious. Because there is an interaction. When consciousness grows, of course, this growth has to come from somewhere, and this is the unconscious. So when you learn the guitar before, it's unconscious to you. You don't know how to play it. You maybe don't have a feeling for rhythm, music structure, and so on. But by learning the guitar, you integrate this part of reality into you. You integrate structure, music, rhythm, and so on, moving your fingers. And this comes from the unconscious. So the consciousness ventures out and gets something. You forgot something and you try to remember it. That's also the consciousness going out to receive something from the unconscious, also being open to it. Of course, the unconscious also pushes against consciousness. So we have certain ideas popping up. For example, when you want to remember something, but you can't, and it's on the tip of your tongue, at a certain point, it just pops in your head. Same with ideas. Same with fantasies or daydreaming or certain associations that just come up, and you don't know where they're coming from, but you're pretty sure that they're coming from you. And the same way, Jung saw dreams as something that pops up from the unconscious. So you have these automatic processes running in the background as a psyche. Similar to your organs, you have your heart beating all the time. You don't have to think about your heart beating. Otherwise, everybody would be dead if we really had to be consciously beating our heart, or the liver working, all the work by itself. Same as dreams, there's something working automatically. Normally, you don't notice it because Jung says the external stimuli of the outside world are so strong that it overrides everything else. So there is something happening in the background, but you're not really aware because everything is just too loud. It's like trying to talk to someone at a concert. It's easier without the concert. So this is what's happening when you go to sleep. You close your eyes, everything is quiet, ideally. And slowly this barrier between consciousness and unconscious gets looser and looser, and all those stuff comes up. So what is the stuff that's coming up as dreams? Jung had certain characteristics he's associated with dreams. The first one being that it's hyper-subjective. It's the most subjective experience you can have because you're the only one who can really experience it. You're the only one around who can remember it, can say something about it. But it's not only the experience that makes it unique and that you're the only person there, but rather also that it's part of your psychology coming up. It's a different, let's say, department of your psychology that now has a chance to say something and to communicate. So it's not something completely objective, it's still something part of you. And he saw dreams as a natural product, like a plant that grows, like an animal's there. When you go into the forest and you see a deer, the deer has not directly something to do with you. It's just also in the forest at the same time. And he saw this as the impersonal part of the dream, that it's nature just happening and doing something. And in that sense, it's also very unconcerned for you. The deer does not really care about you. It's just there doing its deer thing. And it's also not a guide or some deeper wisdom that's immediately graspable there. By following the deer, you won't hit a certain gold trove or anything. And this is already one of the main differences that are between Freud and Jung. Freud had this idea that a dream is a clever facade. He said the main motivation for the dream was to keep the dreamer sleeping. The dream as the fulfillment of a wish. And the wish is to keep sleeping. So the dream, he said that the certain function called the sensor is showing all the stuff to keep the person calm, to not upset the person so that they don't wake up. Not sure how nightmares play into this, but Jung said, nah, a dream is not a facade. A dream is what it is. It can only be this way. It's not made up by you. It's not made up by anyone. It's just appearing and happening like the weather. And it's these automatic processes running in the psyche that are doing something outside of consciousness. And this is something that Freud would agree to, in a sense that normally it's this idea that you say, consciousness, I know everything that I want and why I want it and what I want to do and so on. And the idea from Freud was that we are not the masters in our own house, so that there are also other things happening that we are not aware of, that are happening in the background, in the unconscious. And in that sense that a dream is a natural product for Jung, it's not a finished, usable product yet. It's not its own interpretation. It's like asking a deer what species is. It does not know what its species is. Rather, the context that's provided by interpretation that can tell you how to order something and structure it. And because it's something separate from consciousness, means that's also something that's outside of your understanding. And Jung said he interpreted over 80,000 dreams in his lifetime for patients, his friends, family, also himself. But even though he has all this experience and he discovered all these things and developed all these concepts, he said with his own dreams, he's at a loss. It's always the beginning of some complicated interpretation procedure, that it's not saying, okay, now I know how to interpret dreams and I know immediately what anything means. I know it's always outside of consciousness, which means there's a conscious effort to be made to interpret, to understand, to see what a dream could mean. And there, a very important point is that dreams are not meant to be taken literally, but rather symbolically. So when somebody is dreaming of killing his father, it's not the dream telling him, hey, kill your father, but rather that there is something inside the psyche of the dreamer that's saying, okay, maybe you should distance yourself from your father, or let's say the image of the father figure needs to die for you to progress. So, and it's this symbolical understanding where Jung said this is very much missing in the modern world, as a modern Western mind is rather tending to an objective, materialistic, literal view of things, but missing this symbolic part, which is more similar to mythology, religion, spirituality, fairy tales, and the whole processes of how these symbols interact and how they come up, he attributes to a simpler psychology than this very complex consciousness where everything is interlinking. Like consciousness is like a sports car, everything is coherent to each other, it's structured, it's connected to each other, and it's highly efficient to do certain things. But a dream is not all these things. As a dream is not this structured, coherent thing, but rather seemingly random stuff coming up. And in that sense, it is simpler as one could think. Dreams, for example, use a lot of analogs, just analog pictures, where it's more like, this is similar to that. And he has this example from the Native Americans when the first Europeans came and they brought horses being originally from Ukrainian area. The Native Americans were confused by the horses, and they would call them rather tall, long-legged pigs because they are similar in the sense of pigs, that they have a snout, they have the pointy ears. So it's this grasping for analogs that something is like something else, and to bring there a comparative comparison. And this should be kept in mind. And you also notice that dreams are like a constant background. I already noticed that this dreaming association product coming up constantly, but we are mostly not aware of them happening. So it's a separate space that is not only existing when we sleep in the night, but rather it's like an ongoing story that's going on the whole time, even when we're awake, but only at night we're dropping in. It's like turning on the TV or the radio, and there's something on. And it's been on before, and it will be on afterwards when you tuned in. But it's always running. So it's really us eavesdropping into something that is always there. And one of the most important parts he said about dreams as a characteristic is they're compensatory. He had this view of the psyche being a self-regulating system. And a little bit like when you would stand up and you would move too much to the other side, or if you would go surfing, as soon as the body notices that it's shifting its point of gravity, you will stretch out your arm or you will try to rebalance, and the body does it all by itself. And similar to the psyche, as it noticed that a certain part gets too much focus and too much weight, it will try to create a counterweight internally. And one of the important things of consciousness is that it can focus on something and focus on a certain part of reality, but that it overshoots, that it's too restrictive of other things. So when you drive your car, you focus on the road and you try to block out everything that's happening around you. But everything around you is still happening. And the unconscious, in many ways, also with dreams, tries to bring the other stuff also back into focus, because you can be focused on something so much that you lose the rest of life. If you want to have a great career, right, and you work 15 hours a day, you will be incredibly successful in that career. There's likely no career you will not be incredibly successful in when you work 15 hours in, but you will lose access to partner, to family, friends, hobbies, and so on. And the person over a long time will feel like shit because of that. So because something, again, will try to reestablish the balance and trying to push certain contents into awareness to bring the person back into a more balanced state. And as I talked about these personal and impersonal parts of the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious, this also has an influence on dreams. So you can dream of things that are known to you, like people, places, objects, situations, but there can be also all this other weird stuff that's hard to understand. So what we have when we lay down to sleep is that our ego, our center of awareness, is slowly moving into the realm of the unconscious, into the sphere of the unconscious, to drop in and see and experience all the stuff that is happening there. And because it's not related to consciousness, what's happening there, it's on one thing hard to understand. That's why people ask, okay, what does it mean? Why dreamt I of this? It's also that you can dream of very disagreeable things, especially in nightmares or situations like killing your father. Or you could have a very removed view from dreams, that you really like the aesthetics, say, oh, there's a nice experience to dream of foreign worlds or of flying. But there can be a general disconnect between dreams. I would guess not for this group, because you would not join an event called Dreams if you would not be interested in dreams. But I'm trying to establish a general case. So when we're talking about the interpretation of dreams, this would be an analytical psychology approach to dreams. So there are very, very, very many different ways to look at dreams. The same way as to any topic, you can approach it from different angles, do it in different ways. But the one I'm talking about is for analytical psychology, and this is how Jung did it and Jung talked about it and how he used it in his therapy practice with his patients. And I have here a quote to a little bit exemplify how he approached dreams and how he saw the interpretation process. It is not the ambiguity of dream symbolism that sets an obstacle for understanding the dream, but usually the interpreter's lack of understanding. So it is really trying to find out what this dream meant and how it should be interpreted, and that there's a huge, let's say, upfront cost necessary to really get down to how a dream should or could be interpreted. So when Jung would get a patient with a problem, he would meet with this patient on a regular basis to talk about the person's life, to get to know the person. Okay, what you're doing, what are your interests, what is your life story, and so on. And he will get the person to talk, to learn a lot about the person, to learn basically everything that there is, to explore their consciousness. Because everything that is available to the person, again, is consciousness. Everything that they can tell, that they know, that they do. And when he would have explored everything of that, he then would tell the patient to write down every time that they dreamt. And he would let this person do it for a very long time. He would say, to properly analyze dreams, you need a dream series. You need 50, 80, 100 dreams to really watch this drama unfold. Because again, this is this background process running the whole time, and you're just tuning in from time to time to see what happens. So you need this whole long drama to unfold over time. And that's what he wanted the patients to document. And the reason why he would first let the person talk about themselves, about their lives, was to establish this conscious part, because the dream would be a compensation of the conscious part. As consciousness is one side of the scale, of course, the other side also goes up, and there has to be put something on this scale to create the balance. And the counterweight is the dream. So to properly analyze a dream, you need to be aware of the conscious attitude, because the dream is compensatory, and you don't know what it's compensated for unless you know the first reaction that created the need for a compensation. He would very often also not give his patients any introduction on how to interpret dreams. He would really want the patients to document them very free and without criticism, naively in that sense. Just write down anything you experience. Because in a sense, when you tell people how to interpret dreams, this will in turn influence their dreams because it's part of consciousness. And he had some very famous patients, one of them, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who won a Nobel Prize in his 30s for his works in physics. And he made a whole seminar out of that, dream symbols of the individuation process, which is great and amazing. And he really wanted to capture these natural products in Pauli, because he was going through the individuation process and had really archetypal dreams. And Jung wanted that as his empirical research. And he had other patients that he used like this by having them record this whole dream series, over hundreds of dreams, and to really find this connection of overarching story happening in there. So the patient would have written down her dreams, come to him, and he would talk with the patient about the dreams. And he would use a technique called amplification, which is all the things that are now written down, Jung would talk about. So, for example, the patient would dream of a table, and he would ask, okay, yeah, what kind of table? What's it made of? How does it look like? Because this is a way of applying, again, consciousness and trying to connect unconscious things into consciousness. When could be any table, but maybe it's a table where your father sat when he said he does not love you. This again then has a meaning to gather additional, I'm sorry for all the father examples, but this is what I'm coming up right now. The amplification means to get more conscious content, to integrate it more and more into consciousness. And this has a very interesting reason, because after they talked about it and integrated the dream contents into consciousness, of course, the next night, the dream again would create another counterweight, because the weight on the other side has changed. So it's becoming like a dialogue of integrating dream parts to create the need for other dreams that, of course, then reveal new things. So it's really, really interesting approach. Uses as a diagnostic tool and also as kind of therapy tool. So when the patient comes with the dreams and explained what they experienced, Jung would write down motives and themes that are popping up again and again, certain pictures, images, situations, persons, and note how often they come. And of course, ask the person about them. Because here's, again, an interesting thing that makes it difficult to interpret dreams alone. Since you are always limited by your consciousness and your dreams are the unconscious, it makes sense to have somebody outside to ask, for example, very specific questions. He noted that when there are certain aspects of a dream that the patient liked to talk about a lot, then this is most likely part of their consciousness already, right? But then there are things they just mentioned, oh yeah, and then this happened, and that happened, and so on, and they did not want to talk about them. He would press them further on that because this is then parts they are avoiding, and that could be part of the repressed contents, part of the personal unconscious. And this is why it's hard to do it alone, because you need this external point of view. This is the same when you have a problem about a topic, you also go to other people and ask them about their opinion to see the blind spots that you might have, to get an outside perspective, to get new ideas. And we're talking about people in therapy, though there are things that are hurtful and traumatic and that people, of course, trying to avoid. But growth is there where the pain is. He noticed many, of course, now have all these motives, themes, things happening. He was very against dream books. He said, dreams don't think very highly about dream books. So you can't really go to a book and say like, okay, I dreamt of a raven. It means I'm smart or something like that. It's very personal again. It's again, hyper subjective as it's part of your psychology. It's your unique counterweight that only makes sense and refers to your personality. Jung had this whole concept of the personality called functions, thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation. And everyone has like a favorite function when they come into the world. And he said, even knowing that is pretty important to interpret the dreams, because a thinker will always approach a dream in a thinking way, and a feeler will always approach it in a feeling way. And the documentation you get from a dream is tainted by this approach, that they're focusing only on specific parts of a dream. And maybe let things fall. That's why I said, oh no, write down everything. And I will ask you about everything, because it's again trying to find those blind spots and getting into the unconscious, especially in the personal unconscious. So he said there are certain symbols that come up and that are typical, like snakes, where it is possible to get an outside objective view and looking in mythology, religion, fairy tales to have this archetypal idea. And here's really this idea of archetypes and symbols of archetypes. So you have in all societies separated by space and time, certain stories and pictures and images that are always coming up. And of course, they're coming from this collective part of the unconscious, which means they're not only popping up in some, let's say, a jungle village 10,000 years ago, but also in the psyche of people today, again and again. And he said, approaching a dream and trying to interpret a dream is like encoding a foreign language. You might think what it means and have an idea, but it's really slowly and carefully trying to decipher what is happening there and where the connections are, what the meaning could be. So it's a slow and steady process. He linked it to archaeology, where you try to uncover, undust, and so on, to find what's laying hidden. He noticed that dreams follow a structure, and he would use that for his interpretation approach. He would separate it in certain parts, because he noticed that how patients would tell about their dreams is very similar structure-wise, even though, of course, that most patients don't have any dream interpretation training. You would notice that people start with the place and time, where they are, what time of day it is, or what year it is, that they would often talk about persons. And then they would give exposition about a problem. And this comes from Greek dramaturgy that is using here, which is the peripateia, which means the climax. So you have a problem and it's coming to a climax, and then you reach a conclusion, which is lysis. And this gives the dream a final image, like an endpoint. And you would notice that a dream with a sequence that you could clearly identify would develop till a certain point. And this you would call the final image. And this is like the culmination of a dream. There's nothing else to say. So then the dream will shift and move on to a different sequence and to a new topic, or rather to alternative interpretation or approach to the same problem through a different dream. Lysis is this solution that's happening, which is very important. He said he noticed that when people don't have a lysis, that it's often a very fatal sign for psychosis or schizophrenia, because the dream never really ends or not culminates anywhere. But a lysis can also that you wake up screaming and sweating. He said it's again this question how deeply involved you are in the things that are happening. When you would interpret this and have the information of the dreams, you said would be best to have it in 3 columns. The first column being the dream recording that the patient gave. The second one being themes, the topics, the images that are reoccurring. And the third one being all the parts from amplification, where people are trying to apply more of their consciousness to these unconscious contents of the dream. And he said it's extremely important to have an extreme detail to and focus to facts, what is happening. So when you're dreaming of a sewing machine, you can't really substitute it by anything. You have to think about a sewing machine, what a sewing machine means, and you can't move further than a sewing machine can go. And this is a difference again to Freud, because Freud basically said when a dream is a facade and it's trying to hide something, I'm trying to get at what it's hiding. And very often that means substitution. And Freud would say like, oh yeah, you have a bell tower of a church, that's a penis. You have a sword, that's a penis. You have a man with an overcoat, that's a substitute for sex. So this is the idea of hiding, facade, and so on. And Jung said, no, when it's a sewing machine, it's a sewing machine. And you have to think about all the way how a sewing machine could now fit in this situation. And there has to be a very specific reason why the unconscious is saying sewing machine. So as a general advice, Jung said, because of this compensatory function of the unconscious in the form of dreams, the best way to see and approach dream interpretation is that a dream is trying to make fun of you, as it's basically poking you. When you regard something very highly and you overvalue it, the dream will show it in a rather unimportant way. To bring back again balance, and especially consciousness being the light of the campfire, might be prone to think that only what is in light exists and the dark is just not there, which means that consciousness thinks I know everything and only the things that I see and I know about are really existing and nothing else exists. It means I can explain everything, I know everything, I can do everything, because only where the light shines are the things that are truly existing and important. And it's always the unconscious saying like, no, you're not everything you can be. You should be more, you should be different. So dreams are undiplomatic, serious, and kind of making fun of you. And Jung had a very specific focus on dreams with little information, because his thinking was when there's a lot of information that the patient provides, this means there's already a lot of in the consciousness and he has a lot of associations and so on. But the less and more cryptic and unexplainable it is, it's more interesting because it needs to be investigated more. You don't find the whole skeleton, you only find a bone. So you have to investigate more. And he really went into that because it's impersonal, hard to understand parts where you don't have a lot of conscious connections means it's part of the collective unconscious. And Jung was really interested in the collective unconscious, what's happening there. So when you then talk about all the things that the patient has talked about, and you noted the motives, you made the amplification, you looked through all the mythology and religion and so on, which is a requirement for Jung, for a therapist to have all those background knowledge, historical knowledge, religious knowledge. How do you know that there's really something to this possible interpretation that's then provided? And Jung simply said, there's something lighting up inside the patient. When it's explained to them or when they're talking about it, it clicks. It's this combination and some integration of all those different contents that suddenly makes sense. And I like to compare it to a detective story. You know, something has happened, somebody has died, somebody went missing, and you have the whole movie, the whole story, you have all those clues. And it's not really clear how it's all connected. And you may have some wrong interpretations and they went nowhere and so on. But at a certain point, it becomes clear who done it and how the situation was. And suddenly it clicks, everything connects, everything can be linked to everything else. And this is a point where Jung said, yeah, this is lighting up in the eyes of the patient. And the patient also realized that, oh yeah, it's this. So this is a verification mechanism that he talked about. And he noticed some other important things about dreams. As he said, the dreams of adults are very uninteresting and very disjointed, unconnected, and there's a lot of detail, but nothing really makes sense. But he says there is, in the life of a person, specific stages where dreams become very clear, very structural, very impersonal also, and archetypal. And this is when they're children, when they're growing up, puberty, when they're young adults, or at the midpoint where the whole psychology shifts in life, or close to death, where very special dreams can take hold, where that captivate the person for the rest of their life, or can change their life by having this experience, which is an interesting thing, that you experience something alone in your own psyche, but it can change your life. Again, it's this counterweight that suddenly comes up and does something important. He disregarded dreams for future telling because he said you can only know in retrospect if something was really telling future, foretelling the future, which makes it unusable as a device to know before something is happening. But he said, in a sense, dreams are always a little bit ahead of the curve. The unconscious is always ahead of the curve of the consciousness. Consciousness is lagging behind. And certain psychological developments are happening in the background without the person being aware. So there are already things happening in the background and they're building up. Same, for example, in a divorce does not happen overnight. There's a long time going before that, like with any problem or with any change. So there's this whole ramp up time that the person maybe not be aware of, the consciousness is not aware of, but in the background psychology, all the stuff is already being prepared. And he saw that even on a collective scale before World War II. He noticed very strange dreams in all of his German patients with specific symbology and specific situations and so on. They said, okay, there's something brewing in Germany again because it's hitting too many people that were Germans. And another very interesting thing he said, which goes already a little bit in the weird territory, is that you can have dreams of other people. You can have not your own dreams, but somebody else is dreaming, and somebody else can be dreaming your dreams. And the reason for that is the unconscious is reacting, of course, to your consciousness, but also the things happening outside. So the consciousness of other people, of course, is part of the external world. And he noticed that when patients would come to him and say, like, I don't dream, I don't have dreams, he would say, yeah, okay, somebody else is having them. And he would very often look to the children of the people because they are very receptive. Children are very honest and very naive to the world, but unfiltered also. So they see things as they are, they experience things as they are. And he had even one colleague who used this mechanism of having other people's dreams for his patients. And that colleague, he lived in a villa a little bit outside of town, and he lived there with his family and with his staff. So people would come to him saying, I don't dream. And he would say, okay, yeah, just spend the night here and see if you're dreaming. And of course, the people would stay and say, no, I didn't dream anything, and would leave. And then he would go to his family, his children, and to his staff of the house and ask, okay, what have you dreamt? And the mechanisms behind it are a little bit complicated, but I had a podcast episode about it, in part mother, father, child, they can look into. So what would be a conclusion for this now very long topic already about dreams and dream interpretation? Because it sounds very tedious to really interpret dreams. And he would say that even when you have the education of a therapist, you need to have all those background knowledge. You have to invest all those time. It's really a lot of time to get to know the consciousness of the person, then investigate the unconscious. It sounds all very tedious and all very high upfront cost to do it, but it's not really the important thing. It's not that he would really use it to reconnect people to the rest of their psyche, because the problem is that people are neurotic because they are just a small dot in all the things happening, and they're too removed from everything else. And they're so removed that their psyche and their unconscious is so pushing so hard against them that they're having neurosis and they're having trouble and they have problems. It's a counterweight that's banging so hard that people can't live their life anymore. And it's through dream interpretation to connect people to these contents again and to the rest of the psyche. But it does not have to be that this is the way for everybody to do it. He already said it's an important part to be aware of it, to be open to it, and to take it also serious. He said that he would notice in the way how people would act in their dreams, how they would have, what attitude they would have towards their unconscious and to the rest of their psyche. He had one patient, which was a young man, who dreamt of his fiancée breaking through ice of a frozen river and drowning. And Jung asked him, so when you saw this, what did you do? And he said, well, nothing. It's not real, it's a dream. And this was part of the problem, that the person would not act in the dream as they would act in real life, because they said, that's all bollocks, that's not real anyway. So there's this disconnect to the things that have been ignored before that is missing. So this is already reestablishing this link to the unconscious and the parts that are missing in the psyche, because consciousness is limited, and it's the path and the way for consciousness to grow and to expand and to incorporate more of the unconscious, to become a whole person. This is the life's journey. This is individuation. This is becoming more than one is. And so it does not have to be this whole interpretation process, which is hard and complicated, but already this acknowledging and paying attention, being aware and taking it serious to this little happening in the background that brings one already a long way. So this would be my conclusion, and this would be the end of the presentation part. And I really hope you enjoyed it.
This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. During an event, a discussion part follows after the presentation where all attendees discuss the just presented topic or other Jungian concepts. If you also want to join, find the group on meetup.com. The name of the group is C.G.Jung Helpdesk. Also make sure to subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice. See you next time.